guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're gonna do something a little bit differently because I recently moved some documents from my computer and then I found something that I had completely forgotten about that it ever existed even, and that is the fact that I used to write a lot. When I first came to China, I loved writing, and I loved writing about my journey, about coming to China. So I really wanted to share that with you guys because I feel like that really shows about my coming to China and how that adventure started. Because now I've already lived here for a long time, so it's just my everyday life. But back then, it's really interesting to see a different perspective of when I first came to China and I was totally fresh off the boat. So for these videos, I'm going to make like a little, I guess, like vlog series about reading to you guys what I wrote at that time. And please bear in mind that some video clips or photos that I might add into the videos, the quality is super bad because 10 years ago, smartphones were not nearly as good as they are today. And at the time, that's all I had. I had this like old, I don't even remember, little Samsung that took horrible photos and videos. But I'll add that in anyway. I think maybe it'll add to the, the effects of this nostalgic feeling from 10 years ago when I first came to China. So let's get right into it. So I hope you guys enjoy it. We arrived at Beijing Airport with a bang and a bumpy landing. Felt like it took the plane forever to reach its gate, and seeing as I was sitting right at the back of the plane, I decided to stay seated until everyone was out. The South African man seated in front of me, whose name I would later find out was Gustav, was talking to me and telling me stories about China. We stepped off the plane and the coldest air I've ever felt smacked me right in the face. At this point, I was still wearing my short-sleeved shirt because I just came from summer in South Africa in December of 2012. And a few steps later, I decided to get my coat. The airport was quiet, too quiet, and cold and gloomy, and it just felt unfriendly. We went through customs, no problem, and waited for our luggage. After a long wait and a moment of panicking that my bag was gone, we headed to the arrival terminal. I didn't feel so lonely or overwhelmed because I was with Gustav, who I would never see again after this. As we walked through the gates, I looked up and saw my name, and I saw who I assumed was Wei waving at me. I greeted her, and suddenly there was a man with us too, and I immediately recognized his face as the guy from the International Au Pair Association, who introduced himself as Jack. The air was extremely cold, but it wasn't only cold. There was something about it that felt different. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Wei was walking like a person who was being chased by the devil, and I was tagging along with my heavy bag, trying to keep up, my lungs burning from the cold air, freezing to death because I was not dressed for the occasion. We headed for the subway. After 2 stops, seats opened and Wei sat down, and 3 rows down, I sat with Jack. And we were in the subway tunnel, and suddenly we weren't inside the tunnel anymore. And almost as if on cue, just as we emerged from the tunnel, and I saw my first glimpse of China, Jack said, "So, welcome to China." All I saw were big open fields where there obviously once stood trees, some of them still half standing with buildings, very old buildings. For a moment, I looked at it and thought I'd wandered into a place that was like riddled with war and destruction. I looked out of the other window and could immediately see the thick clouds of pollution in the air. It made me cringe a little bit, and I thought back at the blue, fresh skies of South Africa. I was having a long conversation with Jack, and somehow I felt excited about this trip. Now, some might have argued at this point that there must have been something very wrong with me. Soon we got off the subway train. though still underground in the station, and then started one of the craziest journeys of my life. I just didn't know it yet. People everywhere, an ice cold wind blowing down on me, and a smell like no other smell I've ever smelled before. Wei was once again walking like she was being chased by the devil, and I was starting to realize why. There are millions of people living in Beijing. The vast majority make use of the subway system. Hundreds, if not thousands of us were now trying to navigate through Beijing using the subway. People would do anything to get ahead and secure a place in the train. And they all knew exactly where they were headed. So here I was with a 30 kg bright pink bag, trying to pull it along in a massive crowd of people, trying to keep track of Wei, which was hard considering the fact that everyone around me was Chinese. I looked back to see Jack walking right behind me, probably so that they wouldn't lose me. I couldn't help but notice the expression on his face. He seemed just about as calm as a lamb in a grassy meadow. We then transferred to the blue line on the subway. I don't recall how long the ride was. It felt like seconds. It probably was. We got off. Wei and her ever-running little Chinese body was moving swiftly between people, with my laptop bag around her neck. She bought more tickets, and soon we had to face the crowds again. And this time it was more challenging moving between them, as it felt like they tripled in numbers. At this point, I had very quickly learned that if I don't push, pull, run, kick, or block, I would lose. Imagine putting $1 million in a suitcase and dropping it in the middle of a train station in Johannesburg. The ways that people would find to get to the suitcase first. This was the way these Chinese people were trying to get onto a train. Pretty soon it was all over and we walked outside. We were now on some kind of square, so we headed through the gate. We entered this grand big hall and Wei looked at the tickets and it said D7. Now, by this point, I had thought that the craziness was over, but it was far from. We turned around and was now staring at the gate for D7. Now, D7, we are now at the train station. I didn't know it at the time, but what we were doing was we were transferring from the airport, taking the subway to the train station in Beijing. And then from there, we obviously had to go to the platform of the train. So we were now at the gate for the train D7. There were hundreds of people. We looked up at the clock. It said 5:22. Our train would be leaving at 5:47. And this was a bit nerve-wracking as there were so many people. All of a sudden, the lines, or I should say just the blob of people, started to move forward, me still pulling my 30 kg bright pink bag. One guy actually tried to kick my bag out his way, but I think my bag won by far because he probably didn't realize how heavy it was. People were moving fast, and if you didn't focus, you would be trampled to death. We finally made it through, and I saw that we were in car number 2. And this was, of course, right at the front of the train. Well, second to front. I looked at the first car number and it said 15. Great, we are outside, it is freezing, there are so many people, the train might be leaving soon, and we had to walk all the way to the front. Well, Wei was more sprinting than anything else. Eventually, we reached car number 2. We got on and Wei told me to leave my bag at the bag section. We walked all the way to the front and sat in our seats. I was feeling rather unsettled about my bag way in the back. Soon Jack joined us, and it was as if I could just breathe a sigh of relief. He told me to take my coat off as I need to get used to the temperature inside the train, so that when I step out and put my coat back on, I will feel warmer with the extra coat. It made sense, I guess. We were now starting a 5-hour train ride from Beijing to Shenyang.